Okay, good morning and welcome to our 18th, can you believe it? 18 weeks now we've been at this Pimento Network Zoom event in association with the MAAG. As I always say, if you've not been in one of these calls before, and I think most of you have by now, we do record them. A number of people basically who wanted to be on today's call couldn't make it. So we'll share it with everybody afterwards, and we'll also post it on our various different video chats, video lines. One thing I want to talk about this week before we go into introducing our guests is that we're about to launch a survey which will be going out to all of our members tomorrow. The interest is basically to understand better where you are in terms of returning to the office, whether you have made a decision as to when you're going into the office or whether you're still negotiating with your teams. But we're quite keen to find out exactly what your view is, what your team's views are, in order to find ways in which we can actually help you save some money. So one of the things that we've had a number of the agencies that own premises come to us and discuss is that they've got space available and they're very happy to share that space. So if you're looking to both either get rid of your existing space or share space or happy to collaborate, then what we will be doing is trying to match those people almost in like a UCAS way over the next few weeks. So please, even if you are working on your own, do complete the survey, because there's a number of areas we're probing. And as I say, we're doing it with the MAAG, the PRCA, and also with the Harbour Collection. So we have a pretty good, decent base for that. So where are we now? The latest figures, which came out yesterday, seem to suggest that businesses are operating at about 50% of their pre-virus capacity. And that's according to the British Chamber of Commerce. And I think it's fair to say that basically COVID-19 has impacted in all ways in our lives, including work. And some sectors obviously appear to be in a stronger position than others. According to the latest job market report, the number of vacancies fell by 63% in the second quarter of 2020. And for those jobs that are being advertised, competition is very stiff at the moment, with an average application to job ratio of 84%. In total UK, the payroll, as I say, fell by 649,000 jobs during lockdown. More positively, the number of active job postings in the UK topped 1 million this week, according to the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. So there are more jobs still currently available than the number of people who are losing their jobs, which is positive. What's very interesting is where those jobs are available, and obviously it tending to be in low skilled areas. And there is one exception to that, and that is the area of IT professionals. In particular, demand for web designers and developers skyrocketed by 16% in June over May. And then closer to home, really, the worst of Adlan's redundancies, I suspect, are yet to come, with about half the agencies saying they're likely to be making further cuts when the government's furlough scheme comes to an end in October. So I guess really with that as a background, really, it's never been more important to basically both win business and, as importantly, retain business. And today we've got a select trio who are going to talk to us a little bit about some of their tips and some of the things they've learned over the years. We've got Andrew Graham, who I think many of you have met in the very recent past. Andrew's been with Pimento for about 6 months now, I think, and has spoken on one of our previous calls. He's a commercially focused new business and marketing specialist, and he helps agencies, B2B businesses in particular, stand out and grow by building reputable brands. He's honed his craft over the last 15 years, having worked in new business consultancies and agencies for RAP, Visium, Isabar, as well as, or Isabar, should I say, as well as agency network groups like Omnicom and Dentsu Aegis. He himself also is an experienced brand builder and marketeer, and he very much believes in the need to build obviously strong brands, and that brand owners, i.e. you as agency owners, need to be braver than ever in order to create authentic brands that differentiate you from your competition. So we're going to have some top tips from him. We're then going to hear from Helen Darlington, who's the founder and CEO of Woven, which is a global multi-award-winning brand engagement agency based up in lovely Leeds. They work with a very broad range of different brands, quite a lot in the luxury sector. And in 2002, As a one-woman band operating out of her spare room, she launched the agency today. As I say, they have studios in Leeds and also in London. And she's a passionate developer of talent. And her team, and I've met a number of her team, are all highly engaged, highly creative people. And she has a very broad range of services that she offers her clients. So, a full service proposition in her space. And then really to get an alternative point of view, we've also engaged Phil Lancaster, who spent nearly 30 years working for some of the leading agency holding companies. So he's worked at Bates, the Labour Group, WPP, J. Walter Thompson, both on domestic business, but more frequently on international or global business. He's had roles including running work Land Rover, Jaguar, Mazda, the Kellogg Company, Rickett Benkiser, and for the last 12 years, he looked after the Bayer business at JWT. If you can hear that background noise, I apologise. There's somebody in our garden, but I'll go on mute in a second. And he's a passionate and leading expert on customer service, on account handling, and the art of account handling. He now has set up his own consultancy, the Parkwood Consultancy, and he's specialising in helping agencies understand how they can communicate and get more connectivity with the C-suite. So we'll cover off really same subject matter from 3 different points of view. One from, as I say, Grey Matters, from Adam Graham, one from Helen Darlington, from the CEO from Woven, so from the agency point of view, and then one from the consultant's point of view, from Phil Lancaster, and somebody who's always come from the big groups and has got some interesting lessons to share with us. So I'm now going to hand over, and I'll start, if I may, with Adam, who's going to give us a little bit of background. We're sharing his screen. I'll go on mute because of the noise outside. If you've got any questions, please use the chat box at the bottom there and share your questions with all of us, or if it's to an individual, please do so. And we'll come to those hopefully at the end of their short presentations. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stephen. So hi everyone, morning. Just as you say, most of you have met me or know me from the past. Today Stephen asked me to share some thoughts and some slides around selling to the C-suite and what changes you might need to implement in order to do that. We've had a lot of experience working with agencies that sort of start, as sort of Helen did, in the bedroom, kind of freelancers moving into building consultancy and then scaling beyond. And we do see a trend of how people need to change and what they need to adopt over that time in order to attract, bigger projects, bigger budgets, and more senior buyers. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. I've got a few slides just to sort of bring to life a little bit about, what I'm discussing. So yeah, essentially, there are some changes that do need to happen over time. Looking at this slide, so this is some of the things we talk to agencies about. So on the left-hand side is potentially a mindset or a way of you might be running your business, or pitfalls you might be falling into when you're building your sort of sales and marketing strategy. And on the right-hand side is kind of like the holy grail of where agencies would like to get to and how they might need to change. So often agencies, when they start up, they're very executional in what they deliver. So, they get a brief, can you build me this website? It's very specific, yes or no. And obviously the place where they want to be is more strategic, more consultative, asking more discovery questions further up the food chain, helping to actually create that brief to start with. Often agencies come to us where they're competing on price or on cost all the time, and they get pigeoned into that hole. And actually, your brand and who you want to be, you actually want to be able to charge more money for your services, but actually have the prospect see the value in spending that money with you. So it's about how they perceive you, how you are able to show them value as opposed to just being seen as a cost. You might be very production-led, so you might deliver, again, a bit like the executional comment, you might be able to produce and deliver, but is it very insight-led? Are you using strategy to actually carve out, understanding about an audience, about a market, and therefore how that might shift the creative work or the deliverables that you're going with? your blogs, your thought leadership content, are they kind of tactical blogs that might talk about, the 10 top tips of SEO, or, here are some trends that are happening right now in video marketing? Or are they thought leadership? Are they actually about expressing an opinion, a polarizing opinion that actually leans into research and actually sort of provokes people to think in a different way? When you're selling, do you come across as maybe a bit desperate? Maybe your pipeline is lacking and you really need to fill that pipeline. You really need that work because your cash flow is not there. Or do you come across confident and actually quite poised and relaxed? And that's something you need to consider. Are you trying to close really quickly? Are you looking at leads that are coming in the door and thinking, yeah, we've got to get that through the door now? Or are you approaching new prospects and thinking, I've got to get a meeting, I've got to close that contact within, weeks or months? Or are you nurturing long-term relationships and using account-based marketing to focus on prospects that might take 2 years to close? So that's another shift. Looking at the seniority of the people that your clients are, or who you're prospecting to or working with, do they tend to be mid-level people, junior people within the organization, people that are, given specific tasks to go out there or manage a certain project? Or are you talking to, CMOs, the marketing directors, the ones who hold the budgets, the procurement teams that are actually calling the shots? And, are you doing short-term projects, delivering things within a period of time and then that being the end of the client relationship? Or are you working with clients on a long-term retainer? Is there a long-term relationship there that's building gradually over time? So they're just some of the things that we often see how agencies need to shift. And I've got a couple of questions that I'll go on to for you to think about. And if you obviously ask any questions, if you're unsure of what I mean or how you can actually help me, see this shift happen within your own agency. So often from a sales and marketing perspective, we talk about content a lot and how we use content to get in front of these people, whether that's to gain awareness, whether that's actually when they're considering a new agency, whether that's through the pitching process. And I recently looked on Raconteur and did a bit of work just sort of looking at some insights where they spoke to sort of 500 European C-suites. And this was quite interesting, I thought, just some stats that I thought I'd sort of bring to you guys. So 51% think a lot of the content produced by brands, whether that's agencies, yourself, lacks credibility. And so thinking about partnerships and how they can increase your credibility is really important. So, if I was to go out with a report of Grey Matters, or if I was to go out compared to a report with Grey Matters and Pimento, that's going to give me more credibility because of that partnership. The same way I might partner with Beamer, or the way Pimento's partnered with the MAAG. The power of partnerships is really important when you're a small agency, and it's looking at other credible partners around your network who potentially could refer you leads, but also you could maybe collaborate with to, I call it standing on the shoulders of giants. And that's really powerful when you're trying to build credibility. The other side of things is people seeing branded content as very boring, it's expected, it's repetitive. And, I'm sure you've seen yourself, there's been a lot of Zoom fatigue setting in, and, a lot of content that does get repetitive in our space. So it's challenging, but we do have to continually think about how we can stand out from the competition, how we can own a point of view and be polarizing, or just be, don't sit on the fence basically and create content that just is, grey or appeals to lots of people. It's all about finding your audience, really diving into a point of view and expressing it and creating a debate. And then the other two stats from the report was the importance of design, which is actually, according to these 57%, say brands don't take design seriously enough. So this is thinking about, your own websites, your own creds, how you put together infographics and PDFs and things. It's really important. And I noticed this as Grey Matters. When I sort of launched my business, I thought, well, I'm selling to a lot of creative agencies. They're going to be quite stringent on their design and what they expect to see. So it's something we invested quite heavily into, you know, like these icons that you see and, you know, the stylistically how it comes together. So do think about your own image and how you're coming across, because often people say, if you can't do it for yourself, then what hope in hell have you got doing it for them? And also lastly, there was, you know, an interesting stat about long versus short form content. And often people thinking, you know, being obsessed with micro content and that's what they're looking for. But they actually think that, you know, long form content is still really helpful. So, you know, we talk about white papers, or, you know, people look at videos and, you know, should they be 10 minutes, 20 minutes? Is an hour too long? And, you know, again, I don't see the length of that being an issue. So there are a couple of stats just from a content perspective if you're thinking about using content to attract C-suite. And then just going into the column on the right hand side of my first slide, I've just sort of broken that down into different sections. So, and what I mean by that, and these are questions that you could possibly ask yourself. So in terms of being more strategic, do you list your services on your website, or do you talk about the challenges that you solve clients fix? You know, that's something how you change the perception of how a buyer sees you. You know, if you go out listing, you know, every little service, you commoditize what you do, and therefore you're unable to be more consultative in your approach. Think about your questioning technique, you know, those big discovery questions. And a client, especially the C-suite, can tell a lot from the questions that you're asking about your intelligence, about your understanding. And it's also important to say there has been statistics that asking too many questions can actually have a negative effect on attracting people from the C-suite, because you have to remember they've answered these questions hundreds of times before. So keep pegging them to answer more questions is actually going to get their back up. So use your questioning technique and show your credibility quickly. Think about value-based pricing. You know, are you losing pitches because you're too expensive? Are your prospects transfixing on price? And if so, maybe they're the wrong prospects, or maybe you're selling your services in the wrong way. You know, are you able to justify the investment that people are putting into to you, and showing and getting them to focus on those outcomes rather than getting them to think about the bottom line and every bit that goes into that. It's all about sales technique. Being insight-led, you know, how much do you lean on research and insights when when pitching to clients? So often agencies go in with these creative ideas and they think that's going to win them, but actually it's the research and the insights that the C-suite are looking to see. And that's because they're always trying to justify their decisions to their bosses and to their execs. And if they can't justify those decisions based on the research, then they're not going to go with your creative, they're not going to go with you as an agency. So it's all about justifying everything you're doing and opening people up to new insights about the audience, things that they don't already know. Think about thought leadership. So again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but you know, you know, in your blogs, do you share a polarizing opinion? Are you actually seen as an expert, and are you educating people? Or are you just sort of condensing information, or, you know, is it clickbait content that might be, you know, good one week, but not really, you know, going to, you know, test the C-suite exec to think, oh, that's an interesting point of view. That's really made me think differently, because that is what thought leadership is intended to do. So it might be questioning about the quality of that thought leadership. And then last few points. So I think that thought leadership one repeats itself, so ignore that one. Confidence is a really big important factor. So, you know, when you receive a brief or a lead, and when you're in that pitch process, who's in control? If it's the client and prospect fully in control of the process, the direction of everything that happens, then you can't sort of set those boundaries. You're unable to steer it in the way that you suggest as the expert should. So I think it's about wrestling that control at every stage of the sales process. You know, do you plan conversations with a goal in mind? So often you get into those conversations with a client, and maybe a very senior client, and actually, have you got a goal in mind and where you want the conversation to go, or are you actually letting them push the conversation and be steered around? And that's something you've got to try and control as well. Do you feel on their level? Often, you know, we put these C-suite up on this pedestal, and therefore we get nervous or jittery around them, and therefore, you know, we might be able to not get our words out. But actually, do we feel on their level, and can we remain poised in those scenarios when we are put in front of a C-suite exec, and are we able to, because that's a really important part for them to buy into you. The nurturing long-term relationships, this is about you know, clients you want to win. So do you have sort of gold prospects that you would love to win and are well aware that it could take 2 years? You know, I spoke to an agency yesterday who's just opened their second office in Amsterdam, and you know, they wanted to win MBC, but they knew it was a 2-year prospect, and that changes your whole mindset to how you approach them, the research you do, the way you attract them. It's much more subtle. You play the long game. And basically, this is about account-based marketing, you know, having certain accounts and marketing to those people and being really strategic in the direction you're trying to go. And also maintaining that relationship over the period of that time using a CRM system to do so. And then lastly is the decision makers. So how senior are your day-to-day contacts? Are you aware when statutory reviews are taking place? And do you have many relationships with procurement? And, you know, all these questions, if the answer is no, or you're unsure, then obviously that is going to give you a good indication of whether or not you are in the best shape to sell to the C-suite and the kind of things that you can mark yourself on and where you might need to go. So yeah, that's kind of it from me. And I'm sure Stephen will be sharing slides after the session. And I don't know when we're doing questions now, or are we waiting to the end? Stephen, that was good.
Very much. Some great points there, Adam. And we'll do questions at the end, if I may.
Yeah.
As you do raise, obviously, about procurement, and something that I've been meaning to organise is to get Tina Fegan onto one of these calls.
Yeah.
A little bit about actually client attitudes on pitching at the moment, and to understand whether there has been a difference, given obviously that a lot of pitches are still happening remotely, and also get some tips from her. But I think there's some really interesting insights there, particularly around C-suite, which we will actually talk about in a moment, because one of the things I've evidenced and witnessed, I guess, amongst agencies is we get really comfortable in dealing with brand managers, marketing directors, CMOs, but people seem to be less confident when it comes to talking to chief executives or, God forbid, CFOs. So with that in mind, I think we can tackle that subject with our next two speakers. Helen, let me unmute you. You're beautifully unmuted. So Helen, I'd be really interested to understand from an agency point of view, A, what you're doing and what you've done in the past, and perhaps how it's changing at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I'm actually going to turn my video off in a minute because I'm lucky enough to live in a very rural part of Leeds, and it started raining. So anytime it rains, my internet struggles. So I'll do a little bit of an intro, and I've got some slides to share. Purely going to be focusing on what customer centricity means to us, how the current climate is affecting how we should probably work with our clients, following on from some really good points that Adam's just made, and some ending on some tactics that you may want to consider deploying within your own companies. So I'm going to turn my video off and hopefully share my screen. Can you guys see that? Is that working? Yeah, no?
Yes, it's working.
Okay.
Sorry, I just realised because you turned your camera off, you couldn't see me with my fingers up. But yeah, it's working beautifully. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Stephen didn't have his fingers up; he had his thumbs up.
That is technically true.
Brilliant, thanks, guys. Okay, so customer service for us is king or queen. We've been around for the last 18 years as an agency, and over that time we've got a lot of stuff wrong, but we've also got a lot of stuff right, and we've learned from the mistakes that we've made, and we've definitely tried not to make them again. But as our brand archetype is the lover, relationships mean absolutely everything to us. This is a cute little sketch that really hits home, actually. The voice of the customer is online too, and yeah, I'm too busy being customer centric. So what does customer centricity really mean? And for us, it transcends across the entire customer journey. So starting with the acquisition, through the transaction, and then onwards with the aftercare. We put the customer needs before our own at Worthing. We have a radical transparency philosophy, which means that sometimes we might not always say what the customer wants to hear, but it may be the best conversation we have with that client, because customer centricity should be built on a mutual respect and having a common and shared goal. So when it comes to customer centricity, we've seen a lot of very well-known brands struggle. So obviously Netflix, they didn't kill Blockbuster, ridiculous late fees did. And the list goes on. Uber, they didn't kill the taxi business, limited access did. This all boils down to customer centricity. A lovely quote from Dr. Wayne Dyer, if you go the extra mile, it's never crowded. Because in a sea of agencies where we are all offering clients really similar services or some of exactly the same services, and we're all stating that we're delivering against targets, what actually does set us apart from the other agencies? If you think about the client's perspective, how are they going to make a decision between agency A and agency B? And how, once you have won that client over, how do you make them feel like family? And why is that so vitally important to the longevity of the relationship? So where differentiation is a challenge, and we're considering how we create relationships with our customers, this is not the first time that the world has faced such a shock, but it is a massive one, and it happened really, really quickly. And I've included a snippet here from Marriott. They're a 92-year-old company. They've seen the Great Depression, they've been through World War II, they've had many other huge shocks, but the president and CEO is quoted in saying, in terms of our business, COVID-19 is like nothing we have ever seen before. It's having a more severe and sudden financial impact on our business than 9/11 or the 2009 financial crisis combined. So why is that vitally important? Because our customers are struggling. They're struggling as much or worse than many of the agencies across our industry are. And one of the reasons that they may be struggling is because they may not be looking at changing their logic. And as an agency, it's imperative that we help them be the best that they can be in the current climate. So we're just hopefully coming out the other end, but we've been through disruption like we've never seen before. Industries have hit the pause button, factories have stopped producing. Oh, sorry. I don't know what that was. Factories have stopped producing. Families are being hospitalised with devastating consequences. There's many different elements that are, as an agency, that we should shine a spotlight on, and customer centricity is certainly one of them. Turning a customer into a loyal advocate will not only add more security to your agency income, if you harness the relationship, they could generate valuable referrals for you. Plus, most of us actually love being loved, and if our customer relationships are strong, the day-to-day work is far more enjoyable. So how do we do that? And hopefully Stephen's going to share this deck with you guys later, because there's a fair few ideas in here. So at the starting point, the foundation, if we truly understand how their business has been affected recently, is it thriving, is it adapting, or is it flatlining? What are our clients' biggest challenges? Also, if we look at the strength of the relationship between the agency and the customer, is it weak? Is it strong? Is it the best ever? Is the most appropriate person in the business assigned to that customer account? Because we need to improve the relationship at every opportunity, understand and create strategies and solve their challenges for them. So that personal relationship, human to human, is vitally important. If you can't work with every customer simultaneously, that includes all your current ones and your lapsed ones, then what's your customer priority list and what are the parameters that you're going to use to create that list? Is it the relationship health? Is it long, short-term client value? Or is it just the fact that they need your core services and that's what you're focusing on? So once you fully understand each of your customers, their wants, their desires, their challenges, then it's investing in the relationship. So as Adam rightly pointed out, ask great questions, but also be prepared to listen. Always remember customers buy for their reasons, not the agency's. So it may not be a short-term quick win. Suggest other ideas, but using your existing customers as success stories. Stay in touch with them, make it relevant, set up the reason for the next contact, but make it useful for them. Remember, this is a really stressful time, not just as an agency owner, but also for a client. So make sure you're offering them support, advice, and the service that they need. But most importantly, be human. Be honest with yourself, because not every customer is going to be an opportunity. If you can't help them professionally, then check in personally. How are they coping? Are they struggling with the work-life balance? Have they got kids at home? Is it difficult for them? Be sympathetic. Offer them some useful resources if there's things that have worked for you, but just understand them and where they are at the minute. People buy from people. It might not be an immediate purchase, but the energy that you put into each relationship should pay off longer term. And then lastly, look to the future. We're supposedly expecting a recession at some point this year, and many companies make changes after a recession has hit, but that can obviously delay choices. In the past 3 global recessions, nearly a fifth of companies didn't make it. So how are you going to help your customers through that time? I mean, step 1, deliver value. Don't get lost in the weeds of survival. Your customers are probably hurting just as much as you are. Step 2, understand how important you are in the life of your customer. Simplify your customers' lives, make working with you easy and valuable. And then internally, look at redeploying your employees to maximize the value for your customers. Instead of letting some of your employees go, look for opportunities to automate tech, reskill employees, look at the best accounts that they could be working on. And then step 4, transition problem customers. We've all got them. Let's be really honest. There's customers that don't appreciate the work that we're doing for them at the moment. They're not going to appreciate it when a recession hits. Be bold, and if they're not working with you, then possibly consider transitioning them. So aside from those tips, there's also this article that I wanted to direct you to, which is 43 ways to make your client go wow. It's by the brilliant Robert Craven, and there's a URL there for you guys to go visit. So lastly, how serious are you about putting your customer first before you? How much time and money have you invested in making your customer experience worthy of remark? That's vitally important. If a customer is going to recommend you, they're going to recommend you not only on the results that you've managed to achieve for them, but also how you've treated them in the relationship. And then lastly, can you afford not to put the customer at the centre of your agency? Thank you.
Brilliant. Really, really interesting, and some really interesting points there. And I think it's amazing how many agencies, I think, during this period haven't actually spoken to their customers, haven't spoken to their clients. Now, in some cases, it's because they're furloughed and not available. But other agencies I've spoken to have gone out of their way to find out where they are, and if they are furloughed, connecting with them at home, asking what they can do to help. many years ago when I was working with Mr. Morley at Dorlands, I mean, one of the things that we were told in our training, Phil will probably touch on this, is that actually your jobs as agencies and as account handlers in particular are to make the life of your clients easier, but equally too to recognise their ambitions and where they are on their corporate sort of journey. And ideally, obviously, what we're about is obviously make sure they get promoted, make sure that actually the work we're doing for them helps them in their career. These are important things, but particularly now. I mean, I think now, obviously, everyone's worried about the jobs. Every client I speak to, is concerned about where they are, unless they're UPS or Amazon or Netflix. Let's be honest, things are difficult, and actually understanding that pressure on them at the moment and appreciating our role in their world is also, as Helen suggested, very, very important. Okay, I'm now going to turn my attention, if I may, over to Phil, who's going to talk to us a little bit about actually how do you reach the C-suite. We've spoken about this mythical C-suite, and there are a number of tips and ideas that he's got as to how you earn the right and what sort of information and things you should be sharing with them. So, Phil, take it away, sir. Okay, we can see your screen. If you just go full screen.
Phil, you're on mute.
Let's just unmute Phil.
There we go. How's that?
Perfect.
There's the technicalities out of the way. Thank you very much, Stephen. Good morning, everybody. And thanks, Helen and Adam. Great stuff. Really insightful. I kind of wanted to talk about this subject because it's been very close to my heart. And I think, as you heard from Stephen's intro, I've been on the dark side and institutionalized for the last 30 odd years with the networks and the holding companies, and the last 22 years with WPP and JWT. But the thing I learned about running the businesses like Jaguar or Kellogg or Bayer for 12 years and Kellogg for 7 and so on, was that I realized that we had to reinvent the relationship probably every 6 months, but certainly every 12 months. And the only way to revitalize it and to continue to be relevant was to have a very strong and broad, deep relationship with the senior clients of the agency, of the client team. And that's what I wanted to focus on a little bit today, about how to reach them and what to say to them when you do. Let me just take that out. First of all, I wanted to say these are very much personal views based on my own personal experience, as I say, of working in the holding companies and the networks. And whilst I've been out for a little under a year now, and I'm really enjoying being part of this independent sector, I learned things along the way. And as Helen said, I learned a lot of things that were mistakes, and I learned a lot of things that did work quite well. And I'm beginning to share this program now. I'm working with a number of agencies, some of them within Pimento, to help them develop their relationship with this so-called C-suite, which, as my next point points out, is a dynamic feast. Even the definition is open to interpretation, and the membership of the C-suite in any client company, of course, changes quite radically, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But I think, given the level of experience of the Pimento membership, and looking at the people on the line today, I think we'd get plenty of people nodding their head to this next point, which is, whatever your relationship is with this so-called C-suite, there is a very clear relationship between the agency revenue and that relationship. And it's as much about protecting what you've got and stopping interlopers from coming in on your patch as it is about growing your revenue. And the overall program that I've designed, that I'm talking to these agencies with and who are following this program now, requires method. It requires consistency, and it requires measurement. And Steve touched on the fact that when David and he were back with Bates, 300 years ago, the nature of how one kept in contact with the senior clients was quite whimsical. It was quite occasional, and it was, qualitative at best. That's probably the best way I could describe it. It now can be anything but that. It has to have great method, great consistency, and you have to be able to measure what you do to be able to be relevant to these people. But I feel, coming from the dark side into the light of independent agencies, it appears to me to be a brilliant opportunity for independent agencies within Pimento and any other trade group to really take revenue from some of those holding companies and those legacy agencies. And I don't have any bitterness towards them. Some fantastic people still there. But it's very clear that they are not wedded to those constant and global relationships anymore, and the independent sector has much to offer in this area. This is the nature of the program that I talk about. It spans several weeks and workshops and modules and all sorts of things. So I won't dwell on this, but it covers the challenge that we face today. You know, why build these relationships in the first place? What are these C-suites worried about, which is a key module for sure. Helen touched on that. Who are these new C-suite? Because their titles have changed and their skill sets changed. How you create the contact strategy going forward. This is where the method begins to kick in. How you continue to differentiate your service offer. What to say to C-suite? I mean, I would tell you, and I don't think this is being unkind to, you know, my former slave owner, in Mr. Sorrell, was that, you know, I've been to plenty of meetings where very senior agency people have had nothing to say to the C-suite. They simply weren't prepared enough. They didn't have a broad enough understanding of the business. And I think the independent sector is much stronger in some respects in this area. And then there's learning from the competition, some very practical actions and a contact program. But just in setting up the challenge, I won't go through all of these because in many ways, I suspect that, you know, I may be stating the bleeding obvious in some of this today, but hopefully I'll gather it in a way that is useful to you all. The agencies, we agency people, particularly in the networks as well, are beginning to be being ignored and sidelined. You know, and this has been going on for a while. And that's very painful, but it provides great opportunity for the independent sector and for us now. And I'm being provocative here, but I was talking to Tina actually earlier in the week about a client that we're working on. I asserted to her that, you know, I feel like all clients, certainly all the C-suite clients I'm talking to constantly, are reviewing all of their relationships with all of their partners, whether they are long-standing and brilliant. There's no question that the CMO is not the only one calling now the shots on the partnerships and where they spend their money as a client company. So we are all under review, and that should make us both excited and somewhat, you know, careful in what we do. But the trends undermining long-held relationships, you know, competitors are joining the roster, so that's both beauty and the beast for us. Fees are being reduced and indeed in some cases are being culled. And some agencies are slipping downstream because their relevance is being questioned. But the program that we work with suggests a very clear way back to the top table of client decision making. You know, and if you want to be part of the debate about the 3-year plan, and you really do, or the brand alignment by agency, not just network, but within domestic market by agency, or the allocation of new projects and brand funding, better to be in the conversation and upstream than to be left out and, you know, have other people decide your destiny. So getting there needs a method and a program and a strategy. And I should have said this at the start. These are just a few selected charts from the overall program, which is 9 yards longer, frankly. So it's just to give you a flavor. I'm going to present the first half a dozen, and I'm just going to summarize a couple of others after that. Agencies are slipping downstream. Again, I won't dwell. I'm going to pick out a couple of points on here, which is that, you know, if you go to the bottom point on the left-hand side, agencies continue to remain focused on what they can make and not on what value-enhancing outcomes they can create for their clients. I certainly know this exists within the networks. It still, I suppose, exists in the independent sector as well, but far less so, I think, because of a much more commercially minded group of people there. And as the point above says, why we independent agencies can strike at the underbelly of some of the networks now is because they are turning up into meetings and sounding very uncommercial and unworldly, particularly accelerated by you know, the business needs of client companies during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And then there are other more qualitative aspects to this on the right-hand side that, you know, the contacts have drifted with churn, and we've lost advocates or sponsors at C-suite. And it is surprising how many agencies appear to take for granted their client business and don't appear to care very much. So they've invested very little, it seems, practically and emotionally. And this is a great opportunity for us. But here's a key point, I think. is, we talk about the C-suite, the composition has changed and is really changing quite remarkably now on the back of the pandemic. And it used to be quite narrow, and we need to think broader. When we work in the consultancy with our agency teams, this is a bespoke chart. So I've just put here some generic titles to give you a flavour of the types of people that can appear as a C-suite group. And this would change if it was the domestic market only, it has a regional aspect, or it has a global aspect. But the point on the left is quite interesting. And talking to my clients, and old and new, is that the CMO role is certainly diminishing, and both in numbers and importance. And I've just pulled out a couple from the last 10 days. So the CMO for Centrica has disappeared as a role, not going to be replaced. And the UK McDonald's CMO role has disappeared, and they've put a global role in instead. That's because there are many other members of the leadership team of any client organization that we can reach and nurture and develop relationships with, that have both influence and budget, and they sit in this middle box. And I won't go through all of them, but from brand directors to heads of corporate affairs. I have won more new business with marketing excellence leaders, heads of R&D, heads of corporate affairs, because we were in and out of the corridors, working the room, talking to them, spending time, paying homage every time we went to see them, than I have really on incremental brand projects. And then on the right-hand side, you see the non-board members. And we will pick up on procurement in a moment because it's come up a couple of times. So why do we want to build relationships? I will pick two here, but it's a brilliant way, if you can reach them, to demonstrate your evolving, enhanced agency service offer. You never stand still. You always look dynamic, you look positive, you look energetic, and you remain relevant. And that's a big deal if you can get it in amongst that group that I had on the previous chart. But equally, it defends your position on the roster. It's a platform for organic growth. And you can win business without pitches if you reach the right people in the right way and convince them this is just an add-on rather than something incrementally new. And then there's this piece here. I don't know if Tina's on the call actually, but she talks well about this, of course. How do you offset the influence and strength of procurement? Because you have to work positively with them, but you've also got to understand what their skin in the game is in this. And this may be my most useful chart for anybody today, because this fits any particular sector and any particular business. You can move this however way you want. But I put it in a particular way so that I used this to go after incremental revenue. What parts of the business was the client focusing on that I could in some way engage them on, knowing that there was focus for the management and budget available. So, if I was part of the discussion about what brands and service would receive the majority funding, where to, one as an agency knows where to put your new initiatives and to try new things and take them to them. And indeed, did you have a really good idea for how they might bundle up all their tail end Charlies and without Salesforce support for them to push quite hard in a different way with a different model? What JVs, corporate partnerships, or M&A activity, that might sound like it's a big thing going across global businesses. Far from it. I have found, it'd be interesting to see your point of view, that most companies, opcos in their geographies are charged by the senior management with creating JVs or corporate partnerships or bolt-on M&A activity. And if you're part of that conversation, and we manage to inveigle our way into this, you become really useful, actually, in helping them. If, for instance, they're approaching some kind of M&A activity and they don't know the client very well, or they're finding out more about it, you can provide a point of view on its marketing activities and charge for it. And suggesting JVs for them in adjacent categories to drive distribution, is a wonderful way of building out your revenue. If you know what's MPD's in the pipeline or is about to break, and right upstream, it's a great place to jump on this quite quickly and build out your portfolio. And knowing what geographies, cities even, they're focusing on is important. And what pilot studies are in hand to grow top line. There's always a series of what ifs and pilots that clients put money against that they're prepared to write off just to test the top line growth incremental opportunities. If you can get a handle on that and help them first of all, you can earn fee by helping them, but secondly, you probably pick up the right to own it if it comes off and it's scaled up as well. And then the final point, perhaps even the most important really, which is, so where do you think they're going to cut? And can you avoid the cut? What can you do to divert that towards your competitors or to another aspect of their business and away from you? Language. I'm not going to dwell too much on this. All I wanted to say, and this is deliberately a little bit provocative, but because I can say this because I've fallen into this trap many times, I'm sure myself, we can come across sometimes as having expertise in a very narrow comms field. And the industry is often cited as being a bit unworldly or uncommercial. It's a good stick to beat us with. But if you go to the bottom of this chart, I think it's vitally important to sound like a business partner and not just agency management. Because if you're sitting at top table, as Steve said, and you're suddenly in front of the CEO or the CFO or head of global R&D or just a sales director in a domestic market, you can't just have a point of view about a narrow, brilliant area of expertise that your agency has, because they'll want more from you. Or if you don't have that view, then they won't want anything from you. So business partner, as well as an agency, a brilliant agency, I think is a requirement, and we talk about that in the program. Helen touched on this. It's a really important area. Who the hell are these people? And why should you care? They're human beings. And whilst we don't want to go and pry and stalk their personal lives, you kind of need to know. And sometimes it's useful to know what's going on in their personal life, just to leave them alone, actually. Do they feel vulnerable in their role? I've found that I've been a therapist more than ever bloody ad man, actually, over the years sometimes. You can help them. You can put your arm around their shoulder. Where do they want to go next? Who don't they rate in your team? They'll probably tell you off the record. What professional development do they want? Because you can help send them on a course maybe that you give, particularly in digital. And what's the good idea you're going to give them every month to make them look clever, every month. And then just looking at the time we have available, one more chart, I think. I don't know what Steve thinks about this, but I think it's worth having a separate session on working with procurement and adding Tina to the group here, because this is Beauty and the Beast. They're the greatest barrier or a strong partner or facilitator, frankly. And how you work with them and how you engage with them and what you lead with them and how you merchandise your relationship with procurement with the rest of C-Suite. C-Suite like to know that you have a positive relationship with procurement. There's no point treating them as the great enemy and avoiding them or bad-mouthing them. It doesn't work with C-Suite, in my humble opinion. I won't go on to this, but we have methods of depositioning your competition, and they are from the management consultants down to existing roster agencies. And then the final point, I think we probably created more incremental volume, introducing clients to other clients in JVs and partnerships to drive distribution or whatever that happens to be, sharing data. And why C-Suite love this is because it takes advantage of larger partner budgets, perhaps. It demonstrates our creativity and our commercial nous, and it always enriches the ego of clients and extends their own personal network if you're introducing them to the CMO of another company. They've always got half an eye on their next role anyway. So that was a very quick whip through. A few charts from a much bigger program. I've always said never try and sell to C-Suite, and I don't intend to try and sell to Pimento, actually. But there's more behind this if anybody's interested.
Thank you, Phil. So, we've heard three very different points of view, all overlapping beautifully, almost as if it was arranged. And I think that for me, there's some very interesting lessons to be learned there. And I think there's also a lot of work to be done by agencies in general in actually stepping up and becoming business partners, understanding clients' business, understanding where their bit fits within the overall scheme of things. And it's not a natural thing for a lot of planners or account handlers to do. You get so focused on your own little bit, little discipline, and you're experts at that. But if we go back to the old days of full service agencies, people had to be much more T-shaped. They had to understand exactly how the whole part of the marketing mix would actually impact on a client's business and their role within that. And we've somehow got to get back to that. I'm not suggesting for a second that we all become full service agencies, but I think we need to think like we're a full service agency. We need to think about actually what are the channels that are going to help to drive client profitability. But beyond that, we've got to understand their products. We've got to understand their product positioning, their pricing strategy, their distribution strategy, whatever it happens to be, and at least have a point of view. You don't have to be expert in this stuff. I mean, by nature, account handling is a generalist sport. But we all, I think, need to get better at it. And there's some very good advice there from Phil. And if you feel your account handlers and your planners and your agency aren't thinking that way or don't have the capability currently, then I would urge you to engage and have a chat with Phil about that, because he's seeing some great work there. We have some questions in the 3 minutes we have left. And it really relates to actually, I guess, the here and now. You know, one of the things we've all had to adapt our style to in the last few months is actually how you actually pitch and win business through mediums like Zoom. And I don't know whether any of you three have had an experience there. Adam, you obviously thrive on going into agencies and sitting down with the personalities and engaging with them. And Helen, when you're pitching for new business, clearly, obviously, it's nice to actually touch and feel, as it were, the client. For both of you, could you give me some examples or give me your experience in terms of how you've been able to sort of replace and reinvent the important chemistry element virtually?
Yeah, so I mean, we've obviously, you know, we've actually found now, like I think it's Phil or Helen sort of alluded to, a really good time to approach new prospects, and a lot of them are reviewing their agency relationships, and we're actually seeing video calls enhancing that because of the lack of commute time. It's kind of bringing the global world closer together. So working with, jumping on a video call, no matter where you are in the world, can happen, instantly. So I think it's actually opened up avenues and doorways. I mean, I don't think it's replaced, the chemistry element of how to replace that sort of face-to-face connection isn't quite there. But, we've talked, I did a sort of whole seminar on pitching virtually, and I think there was a lot about preparation for that, whether that's technical preparation or whether that's about knowing when to pause, when to let the other person speak, having side chats on WhatsApp with your pitch team to sort of, which you can't do in a room, obviously. So there are some benefits. Recording the video chat so that you can send it to people afterwards. These are benefits that didn't exist in the physical world. So you can play it to your strengths, but it's very hard to recreate that sort of natural in the room chemistry.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I think it's difficult to read the room when you're not in the room. But we've actually benefited hugely from lockdown. We've been invited to pitches we probably would never have been invited to previously if location had been an issue. We've won a recent pitch for a company who we were the only UK company that they were meeting. All the others were from the US, and we won it. So there have been some massive benefits for us as a business, but I don't know if Zoom meetings will ever replace the chemistry that you can gain from being in the room with somebody.
Talking about being in the room, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave this room now because I know a number of you got to get on with calls. I want to thank all three of you for your time today, and also thank everyone for joining us. A good number again, 42 people joined us, which is great. We will be sharing this afterwards, and hopefully you've learned something from today's presentation and discussions, and can take that away and build it into your own business. And we'll see you this time next week. So have a good rest of the week, and love your clients.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.